All right, everyone, happy Friday, September 11th, 2020. This is a big night for celebrations because this is episode 26, and we have got a fantastic show for you this evening. I would be remiss if I also didn't recognize that, in fact, yes, it is September 11th, 19 years ago today. I think is a day that we all know precisely where we were. We know the minute things started to happen. And for those of us sub 60 years of age, it was our JFK moment. I hope we never have to have anything like that ever happen to the country again. But tonight we are going to give thanks for all that we do have and celebrate exactly what is in front of us, in addition to great wine, but great people. And my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels. This is episode 26, half a year milestone episode since we've been doing Shelter in Place, our SIP events. Every Friday night, we bring you live a winemaker from Napa or Sonoma. And it is my pleasure this evening as a privately held wine curator at Cellar Angels to introduce to you the one and only Lindsay Hoops, who is joining us from a gorgeous outdoor location. And we will let her disclose exactly where she is. But Lindsay, thank you so much for spending some of your Friday with us.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for having me. And what a coincidence. I am 26 years old, so I am honored to be on the 26th episode. That is not true.
That is outstanding. And just, by the way, as a housekeeping item, we recognize Facebook folks were having a little technical difficulty getting you live, but we'll be there in a second, so hang on. I'm so 26 years old. Happy birthday.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining us. It means so much to me. And I am zooming into your, I guess, houses, offices, whatever you call them these days, because we have multi-purpose locations at this point. But Martin has in the background what our space looks like in the beautiful, beautiful sun of Napa Valley. My sky is unfortunately not quite as warm, but the location that we're calling you from, or I should say clear, but the location that we're calling you from is the Oasis by Hoops. And this space is exactly what it sounds like. It's a refuge for people. We have an animal rescue, so also refuge for animals to get away.
Whoa, slow down there, young lady. That might be a poll question later on. So I don't want to give away anything with regards to, because there's a lot of gambling action with people putting side wagers on the poll questions and they bet against each other. We'll talk about the Oasis because I think it's very important. And I have some pictures of the Oasis. I want to say hello to Caitlin Greasy, Jeff and Jane Greasy, Jeff Hart, Julie Fogarty from Chicago, Kay Jurica, Kim Vance, winemaker in Sonoma, who lives in San Francisco, Nelson Holden, and Sean Manning. All of them are on right now. Welcome to everybody. And I have to give a special shout out. By the way, Jeff Greasy, this is actually probably something that you can relate to, this beautiful little oasis away from home. Jeff and Jane Greasy haven't missed a single SIP episode. They've been to all 26. So that is either really dedicated or just zero things to do and no responsibilities in the world. I'm not certain which one it is.
Dedicated.
I'll go with really dedicated as well. Okay, so now give me the town location in Napa Valley of the Oasis.
So we are currently in the Yountville AVA, just south of the town of Yountville. So we're about a 7-minute cycle from our primary property, which is in Oakville. Probably not cycle, 7-minute car ride. I don't cycle, who's kidding?
I was just gonna say. I
grew up very much in Napa Valley. So for those of you who are familiar with Napa Valley, you'll know exactly where I'm talking about. But for those of you with less familiarity about the Napa area, Napa Valley is 30 miles long and 5 miles at its widest point. And Oakville and Yountville are sort of the quintessential mid-valley appellations. So if you threw a dart at Napa Valley, you would hit Oakville, and in fact, you'd hit Hoops Vineyard because we are equidistant north-south and east-west, more or less. Both of our properties run along the Napa River. Our Oakville property, though, is north of Yountville, so north of the town. And here at the Oasis, we are just south of the town. So very, very close together, but because they are two appellations, when we blend the grapes, we come up with a Napa appellated wine. We are not able to use a sub designation. And so our property is close together.
Let me show folks exactly what you're talking about, because you just gave a great segue for, and we're going to jump to Google Earth early in the show because we've got a lot to get to. The show is jam-packed. But this is actually, you can kind of describe for us, Lindsay, you just laid out perfect where you are located. So now everybody can hopefully see our big, beautiful globe. And we're going to drill right down into hoops, because I think the way you just described it is perfect, so people get a sense of exactly where you are. So I'll pause right there because that gets a little quick. So you can kind of see, if I back out, you know, you are between St. Helena and Napa, you're almost dead center, and you're almost right in the middle as you were describing, correct?
And you know what that means, Martin? We are the best. Bullseye.
The bullseye. So as we go further and further, and you are just south of Yountville, and this is where the Oasis is. Now, this is where you're sitting right now?
Yes, I think that might be an old, no, that's not us. Let's see, go a little bit further down the road.
North or south?
So you need to go, actually, well, east. Keep going. Keep
That
going.
was where the address came up.
Keep going, and then right there. Oh, so there are two vineyards. So the one that you have the hand on right now is Bell Winery.
Yep.
The one behind it is what is now the Oasis. So this particular,
up here?
Yeah. So I'm
Okay.
sitting behind that building.
Perfect. So
This is quite old. I mean, by quite old, this is not reflective of what it's not today, if you will.
No, yeah, I mean, I have to, the folks at Google never return my calls, so they need to update their satellite images from Earth. But I can show some folks exactly what we're looking at as it relates to what they get to see when they get there. So this would be a beautiful spot of the barn, yes?
Yes, so that is our newly renovated production facility, and I should call it home away from home, because we don't like to think of it as a tasting room. We like to think of it as a full experience. We have, as you saw, two air. One of them is actually being converted into a commercial kitchen, and the only reason that I say that picture, that satellite picture, was outdated is because we actually have converted a lot of that empty space that used to be vines. We pulled them out and created a regenerative farm. So we have our animal sanctuary there. We create all of our own compost, and then we have a full 1.5 acre organic garden that is what you can see in these photos. So our animal sanctuary includes a host of fabulous animals that all have a job on the farm. You see in that picture our donkey, Jack E. Oasis.
Was that like drawn out of a hat? Who came up with that?
No, my husband is clever, I guess.
I guess. Jury's still out.
No, he's very.
That is gorgeous.
So, and that's actually an older photo. We have a beautiful.
Oh yeah, you can tell this is kind of in the construction zone.
Yeah. So we have Jackie, 7 goats. We have 3 rescue pigs. We have 2 miniature horses, and then this deck area that's actually right behind me, where you can sit and look out into the animal sanctuary and also the organic garden.
No, and this is actually kind of nice too, because you've got the charcuterie tray, the wine glasses, you're just sitting out on the patio. So I fully understand now why this is named the Oasis.
Looks like home, right?
Yeah, it looks like amazing is what it looks like. And I like that it's kind of equidistant in the middle of, all of Napa Valley.
As far as being in the middle of the valley, what I love about it is I think that, we're very accessible to San Francisco, and also sort of regardless of where you are in the valley, it's very easy to get to. And then, I think Yountville is a fabulous town. It has a lot of culinary influence, which I think has really influenced a lot of the events that we are doing. I grew up in sort of a food and farm environment, which isn't the case for all of Napa. And what's fun about that is we've been doing a lot of virtual cooking events. We've partnered with a number of chefs who have a decreased workload because of COVID. So anybody who's interested in sort of getting into the food pairing and cooking side of what I think is the wine lifestyle, we're doing a lot of those events. So I think where we're located has really inspired a lot of what my vision is for the winery.
And you mentioned you grew up kind of in the food and agricultural side of things. Walk us through that, because I don't know, if you grew up in California, if you grew up out on the East Coast, or if you were kind of walking the vineyards because your father, give us the whole story how Lindsay grew up.
Absolutely. So I was born in San Francisco. My father was a captain in the military. He was actually in artillery, for any of you Army brats potentially. And he decided to move to Napa because he was sick of the fog. And there is a veteran home in Napa Valley, and it happens to be in Yountville. So this was the only town that he was really familiar with. He didn't know that much about wine. He didn't know that much about farming wine grapes either. And that's our bird, Lello bird, by the way. This is all accurate ambient noise. I'm not playing sound here. So in any event, he decided to move us up here. I was about a year old. So I've been here my whole life. I won't age, but it's not 26. So my exposure to Napa Valley is that Yountville actually was not even a town, and it certainly wasn't a culinary mecca or destination. We actually, when I was growing up, we had a Hells Angels biker bar, which is where Bistro Gentil is today, if you've ever seen it. And we had the Veterans Home, and those were really the only two things. We had a population of 81 people, and it was not the culinary inspiration. But I did grow up, we grew all of our own produce. And so I had one of those sort of stereotypical lifestyles where we actually grew what we made, which is interesting to me because so few people have that childhood these days. But that was, and I think we're kind of yearning to return to that during COVID times. I hear that a lot, that people are getting into husbandry, getting into, wanting to grow their own produce, even if it's on their windowsill. And that's kind of what was, my early childhood, is that we grew everything that we ate. We got chickens because we wanted eggs. I mean, that was sort of how I grew up. And I thought it was really dull in a lot of ways. I mean, it's a lot of hard work to be in agriculture, and it's a lot of hard work to take care of, animals. So husbandry is a lot of work. And I would say that I took it all for granted. And COVID has really reinforced to me how special and unique the lifestyle is. But I learned that a lot earlier when I decided to come back into the business. But essentially, as I was growing up, I had a job. Everybody who grows up on a farm has a job. So I was responsible for turning on the farm.
They're very low paying, but you have one.
Yeah, they're non-paying. As all jobs are for your dad, I guess, when you're growing up.
Yeah. I grew up on a farm too, so I recognize that the chores are never ending. Never ending.
And, I mean, we have to be very flexible because Mother Nature throws us tosses and turns all the time. So even in a typical season, we've got, hail or frost or, you name it. And so we have to basically be responsive at any time during the year. And with, global warming in some respects, the seasons have become less predictable. So
sure.
This year we're picking a lot earlier. We've never picked our Merlot before September 22nd. We're picking it next week, so it's like, everything is really changing in a lot of ways. So in any event, I guess I grew up on the farm. I have that stereotypical, I walked through the vineyards and really learned a lot about it from the ground. I was never formally educated in viticulture, but I had the school of hard knocks and the military dad who kept me very well informed about what I should and should not be doing.
No, it's interesting that even with the military dad, that you didn't have 7 different locations prior to high school. And you get fortunate in that capacity. And for everyone that's just joining us, our guest this evening is Lindsay Hoops from Hoops Vineyard, located just south of Yountville in Napa Valley. Martin Cody with Cellar Angels, and many of the folks online right now, probably waiting for us to start on Facebook as well, are drinking Lindsay's 2015 Hoops Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. That's what I'm drinking. And so Facebook, apologize for the technical difficulties. And I want to let people know, how do they get this wine? So it's something that we decided to do early on in the pandemic, was to develop a Friday evening ritual. And as I mentioned, this is our 26th in a row. And the best thing about it is you can go ahead and get Lindsay's wine, which, as you can see right here, is the 2015 Hoops Cabernet Sauvignon. For Cellar Angels, we were kind enough to get a little bit of a discount, but we put together these sip kits, and the sip kits are available. They have the next 6 Friday night wines in a row. So if you are looking for things to do on a Friday night, you can simply go to the Cellar Angels website, navigate and get the sip kit. and you will be set for the next 6 Friday in a row. And it looks simply just like this, your custom collection, shelter in place. We're featuring Lindsay's wine tonight. Next week, we've got a Chardonnay. And Lindsay is actually, unfortunately, I think for a while, our last female guest. We've had 6 spectacular women in wine in a row. And Lindsay is the final, probably the, I don't want to say best location, but certainly has the most organic farm around her with regards to livestock and animal soundtrack. But please go to the Cellar Angels website. You can grab your kit, join us every Friday night. And so Lindsay, you grew up on the farm. When did dad or you or the family decide, okay, we're in pristine wine country? What year was it that you said, we've got to either buy a vineyard, plant a vineyard, both, and get into the winemaking business?
Well, he went whole hog. So we moved up here in 1981 and he actually planted the vineyard. We moved into a very sort of falling down farmhouse that used to be the fire department for the town of Yountville. And Jeez. It has actually only been owned by 2 families in over 100 years. And actually everybody on my street has been on the properties for multiple generations, with the exception of 1 family. So we have a very unique cul-de-sac and kind of an unknown road in the Napa Valley, Yacht Mill Road, and that's where our Oakville estate is. So my father was just dialoguing with the woman who lived next door to us. She was a single mother and she had a lot of land that took a lot of time to take care of. And so he basically offered to take it off her hands and asked the rest of the neighbors, what should we plant? And that's kind of how we ended up in the wine business. He asked effectively, you know, what crops were popular. And today it seems so outrageous to think that it was a question, because now everybody plants grapes and within that usually Cabernet. Well, it wasn't so obvious back then. People were still planting citrus and prunes and a number of other crops that made Napa a much more diverse agricultural system. And that's one of the reasons that we've actually tried to recreate some of that diversity and biodiversity on our farm, the Oasis, because I think that that's having a huge impact on disease, and sort of the lack of biodiversity is actually having a negative impact on the industry. So we're hoping to kind of recreate it back in our own way.
And so that, I think, is I mean, when did the Oasis open for tasting?
March 1st.
Okay, yeah, so it's extremely new. And that is an idyllic place to taste. I love the combination of the biodiversity, the farm animals and everything. And I would imagine it's kind of special for you who grew up on the farm to be able to sit back and pair wines with great foods. And is there anything with regards to like a can't miss with your 15 cab or with your cabs in general where that might go under the radar, where people would be surprised to learn, oh, this is something that you're going to want to try at home?
That's a tough one, because I think we've developed a corks and cookery program. And one of the things that I've been trying to help people understand is that, you know, there are obvious pairings with Cabernet. So people always default to red meats or, you know, those kinds of things. Steak, you know, they think, oh, Cab, I want a big steak. And those are fabulous pairings. There's nothing about this wine that pairs better or not as good with a steak. What I will say, though, is that I think one of the very unique things about this wine that I've learned in sort of developing it is we took the oak treatment down to about 40%. And our wine was selected in Japan when we went over there with the Napa Valley Vintners as sort of the best Cabernet to pair with a fatty fish. So people are always really scared to think of sort of a dish, you know, like I love red wine, but I really want to pair it with, you know, fish or poultry, something a little bit lighter. This is a great option. I think it has, because it has a little bit less oak and it has a lot of really bright red fruit, you're not going to overwhelm the fish. Now, obviously, you have to be somewhat thoughtful about the fish. So when we were in Japan, Iron Chef Sakai, who was, if any of you foodies watch Iron Chef, he was the original Iron Chef from Japan. And then Naka, who was, yeah, exactly. Who is actually the Michelin-starred chef at Jean Georges. Both of them actually created like a remoulade with a salmon and then a large, like a heavier bodied cod-like whitefish. I don't know exactly what it was. They use the Japanese names. The other interesting thing about our food series, though, that I like to point out is we're trying to come up with more unique pairing. So one of the things I like about Cabernet that a lot of people try to de-emphasize is the fact that some of these older clones, and ours are all really old, have a little bit of a green characteristic, which a lot of winemakers like to hide. But one of the things is it actually pairs really well with Southern food because they use a lot of bitter greens, and they like that contrast, like creaminess and bitter greens. And so that's a fun sort of Southern food pairing. If you like comfort Southern food, you can elevate it with a Cabernet. And I think it's going to complement really well. And people don't think about that a lot.
No, and that's actually perfect contribution to what I was looking for. Some of those hidden things where you may not think about it, and pairing a Cabernet with a Southern creamy dish, you're right, that would not be top of mind. So thank you for sharing that. Did you go to high school in Napa?
I did for a minute, and then I threw a relatively large party. My father wasn't particularly impressed. I thought I was basically gaining some popularity because our neighbor, the Lincoln boys, were very popular in school, and they knew my parents were going out of town. So they suggested that I could gain some level of popularity by helping them throw a party for our friends. You know,
the old parents are out of town, let's take advantage of it party in high school.
Yeah.
Yes, I know it well. We had one in my high school that we hosted that would put risky business to shame. So we'll just leave it there. But so mom and dad, or dad wasn't too fond of this idea?
He wasn't impressed. And of course, everybody in a small town knows you. So I didn't really get very far. And my father suggested / voluntold me that I was going to boarding school. And I decided, he said I could choose which one. And so there was a very popular TV show when I was growing up called Party of Five. And the girl in the show went to Andover. I'd never heard of it, but I was like, I'm going where she wants to go. So I applied to Andover. I got in and didn't understand how amazing a place it was. I just basically sort of was watching TV. But of course, it turned into the most amazing experience, a fabulous school with amazing, I mean, I'm so glad I went. It also helped me appreciate where I came from too, though.
Good point. Now, there's a bunch of Andovers around the country. Which one were you located?
Phillips Andover.
Okay.
Oh, Andover, Massachusetts. Home of, I guess both the Bush presidents, JFK, so many people, famous people had gone there. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I did not know of that lineage. It was really more get as far away as possible.
I was just going to say, it looks like there might have been not only a party of five, but let's see how far away from home I can get.
Yeah, let's put it this way. If I'd known that they had international boarding schools, that would have been on the list, but alas.
So you go to boarding school, and what about undergrad?
I went to Georgetown undergrad. I stayed on the East Coast and decided to study actually international business, Spanish, and Chinese. So I thought I knew Spanish from growing up in the industry here, and decided to sort of figure out how many doors that could open. It was really interesting because I was one of the first Chinese, I was in one of the first Chinese programs. Of course, that sounds so silly now, but there were not that many Chinese programs at the time, and I actually started in high school. So I decided to continue that, and language really opened the most incredible doors for me in my earlier career. And now I feel like, if you can say a couple words to people, it's almost like opening a bottle of wine with them. It's just trying to sort of learn about where they're from. And Chinese in particular is such a fascinating language because, it tells a lot culturally, much more so in many ways than English.
Well, I've got one comment, one question, and
Sure.
the comment is I absolutely agree with you on language helping to break down barriers, and there is something uniquely warming and genuine and authentic than when you are either in a foreign country or speaking with someone that doesn't speak the language, and you sit there and you try to put together words to convey messages, and there's just an instant bond and connection there, which is really difficult to replicate in other realms. And so it does bring people together, and it's always fun to experience that. That's the comment, and I've experienced it a bunch of times. The question would be wine related on why did you dial back and tone down the oak regimen?
This specific wine or in general?
In general, or both?
So I
And
think,
by the way, hello to Nick Schramm, who also commented that Andover, not a bad hockey team.
yes, I did not play hockey. In fact, I was, of course, your stereotypical California girl who showed up with like no winter clothes. And it was Easter, and I had like, you know, high heels and short skirts and jean shorts. And I wasn't prepared. No one in my family had ever lived on the East Coast. My dad was from Arizona. My mother's from California. Like, we didn't know what a winter was. You know, we thought we knew winter because we'd seen snow. It's not the same.
Right. Not the same, especially in Massachusetts.
No. So I learned how to shovel snow. I learned how to, like, you know, warm my car. It was fascinating. Anyway, that's why I came back to California.
Smart move.
Yeah, smart move. So I guess with respect to the wine, I mean, you know, there are some amazing wines that have a lot of oak. I think there was a trend in Napa wines, for right or for wrong, that really sort of overemphasized or highlighted the sort of luxury aspects of wine by portraying a portfolio of all new oak every year. And in some cases, the wines out of Napa and Oakville specifically, in some ways became more about the oak in my mind than they did really the balance of the oak and the wine and the place where the wine was from. And so I didn't feel like every vintage was deserving, and definitely didn't need 100% new oak all the time. You know, some wines do, depending on what you're trying to do with them. But one of the sort of, in my opinion, unintended consequences of too much oak is that the tannins a lot of times overwhelm the fruit. And if the wines are drunk really early on, you're going to battle with anything you're tasting alongside it. You know, just like you sort of taste wines in a progression so that you can appreciate the characteristics. So you go from lighter to heavier. It's sort of a thing where when you're pairing wines with food, if all you're really tasting is the tannin and the oak, which has an impact on your ability to taste other flavor profiles, you're going to, in many cases, overwhelm the food. So you don't want necessarily a really heavy-bodied red with an appetizer, because everything after that is going to sort of get blown out in a lot of ways. And I think does that to wine too. It can, you know, and you have to be thoughtful not only of how much new oak you use, but also what coopers, because different coopers, I mean, that whole aging process in barrel is a completely other science that winemakers engage in. I mean, they understand the appropriate toast levels and which coopers. Every forest has a different flavor profile. So if you want to get wine,
I mean, it gets crazy fast, and it's like a kaleidoscope of decision making, and it's interesting. I mean, as a consumer, it's difficult to determine, other than your own taste, right? Is there a best methodology, or does there need to be a best methodology? Because you're right about the seeming endless array of oak regimens that can partake in Napa Valley. Because you can go to one winery and they say, our cooper is on the outside of the forest because that's where a lot of the wild animals come, and they will, you know, do their thing against the trees, and we like that. And our barrels are actually from the inside of the forest, and it's just like, you're like, really? I don't understand why this is just so important. But to each winemaker that will source a certain cooper from, you know, the new French oak, it's a vital ingredient of the overall composition, which is both fascinating and infuriating oftentimes.
well, and Martin, I think that's a good point, because I think it gets complex when you sort of think about all the variables that can go into it. And I like to simplify it. I think ingredient is the right word. It's like oak, all of those different components, the oak. We actually harvest our vineyards, for example, in different sections. We make multiple different wines, and then at the end, we blend them all together. So it's almost like all of those pieces are spices in a spice cabinet. And you put a little bit of this in here, you put a little bit of this in there. So all wines are a blend, more or less. I think people don't realize that. And so we use little bits of oak. Sometimes this oak is a little bit more pungent, you know, and little bits of oak. Sometimes this one has more baking spices. And we play around with it at the end and decide what sort of balance creates the best glass ultimately. So For me, that was because I wanted to emphasize food pairings and flexibility with food. I didn't want the oak to be so dominant, because that makes it more difficult when you are looking to have more kind of inventive pairings with a Cabernet. We make plenty of bigger cabs too.
No, that makes perfect sense. And William Nall, thank you for joining us. I want to, since we're at the collegiate level now, as far as the matriculation is concerned, I want to introduce our first poll question, which you cannot answer. So everybody put your glasses down, put your appetizers down, because this one will probably, she hasn't gotten to this topic yet, but I know this to be a fact. So here it is, your first poll question of the evening. I am a fan of tattoos, mainly because I love the artwork and skill of visual imagery, the passion people have for adorning their body with permanent reminders of important items. It helps me identify gang-related individuals and criminal elements. So we're going to give a few people a chance to chime in. I see votes all over the board. And we've got about 66% of the people in, 77. We're going to wait a couple more. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to share the results and then have you explain the answers. So the number one answer was you would appreciate and adore the skill and artwork of visual imagery. Now, I don't think that's true. So tell me why you love tattoos.
Well, I do love the artwork of amazing imagery. That is true. But I think, Martin, you are actually referencing the fact that I've had my fair share of looking at gang tattoos and using them to prove my cases from when I was a homicide prosecutor. So I have found them a very helpful tool in my toolkit, if you will. And I had a sort of Perry Mason moment in court one time where I actually had to ask the witness to undress because he was denying participation in a gang. And I was getting so frustrated that I had just actually asked him to disrobe. The judge was very concerned about my motivations, and I assured her that I was going somewhere and to give me a minute. And my offer of proof was that I guarantee you when he pulls off his clothes, he's going to have more tattoos that say MS-13 than, you know, I can count. So there we go.
Interesting. And by the way, Caitlin Greasy, don't think I didn't catch the fact that your comment says, we did our homework. We checked her bio from other sites. So we think we've got the correct answer on this one. So that's good stuff. So we now learn that you left Georgetown and went to law school.
That's correct. Well, I didn't go right away.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't go right away, but I actually, I worked in operations and logistics for Sonoma Incorporated because of my languages. So I traveled all over the world at like 22 years old and had a fabulous job. I mean, I had no obligations at home. So I would go for 3 weeks out to Asia, use my Chinese, learn about, you know, production. And that's been amazingly helpful in wine production with logistics and shipping and temperature controlled and containers. And that's been a phenomenally great background to have. But
Sure.
Ex-boyfriend at the time told me that he would pay for law school because in my mind, I'd always wanted to go to law school. He did not because we broke up, but I ended up being very thankful that I went to law school because I'd always had a dream from when I was 5 years old I thought it was an FBI agent. I wanted to be a spy, but the sort of corollary was being a district attorney. So I applied to the DA's office in San Francisco.
So that's interesting because I was going to ask, how does someone say I always wanted to go to law school? Because I actually never wanted to go to law school. And, but you grew up fantasizing about being an FBI agent.
Well, I grew up fantasizing about being a spy.
Okay.
Really realistic. And I did apply and I got fairly far in the application process at Georgetown. But I was advised that the problem is with spies, they need people who blend in because that's the whole point. They want spies to not particularly memorable. So I had these visions, you know, of like the James Bond girls, which I was excited to assume that position, but you know, that's not what they want. They want people who are very sort of deadpan, average. And I guess it was a good compliment that they were like, you light up a room, you know, when you come in and you're engaging. And we want people that, you know, don't do that. And so I sort of parlayed that to, okay, well, maybe I can be on the law enforcement side as a district attorney, storytelling and helping people connect. And so that was sort of how I realized then that I needed to go to law school to be able to do that.
That's fascinating. Where did you go to law school?
So I went to UC Hastings in San Francisco, very intentionally. I'd moved home back to California, and most of the judges in the state of California went to Hastings. And I knew that I wanted to go into public service. And Kamala Harris was the attorney in San Francisco at the time, and Jeff Adachi was the public defender, and both of them had gone to Hastings. So I figured if I went to their alma maters, I would have a much better shot at getting a job at the offices. So.
Was there ever any thought to where you, in your head, you know, thinking that, well, if I go to Hastings and I'm ever in front of a judge that also went to Hastings, that will, you know, hopefully give me some sway?
I wouldn't say give me sway. I think what I knew was that I would get a lot more practical experience because, you know, UC Hastings is not one of the names that rolls off of people's tongues. And a lot of those schools are fabulous, but they're more theoretical. And Hastings had a lot of people in the specific practice area that I wanted to get into. And so I knew that the school was sort of geared to training people to be litigators, judges, those kinds of things. So I didn't think it would give me a sway. I thought it would prepare me with the skill set to do the jobs that most of the students from the school end up doing.
And how long were you in that role?
Well, I went right out of law school. So I was a homicide prosecutor for about 8 years. I had a really interesting, I know everybody's here to talk about wine, but I had a really interesting sort of rise to my career. I essentially was the first published author in forensic DNA post a very large decision that came down from Scalia. So I became sort of overnight a subject matter expert in forensic DNA, which made me a specialist in cold hit cases. And so like as a very puppy dog DA, I was like the authority on how to open up old cases. So they opened up all of the cold hit cases in San Francisco on a grant. And they brought in a gentleman named Rock Harmon, who was the DNA expert in the O.J. Simpson trial, which for a lot of people, they forget that that was the first trial that ever used DNA. I mean,
wow,
crazy because we're so used to it today. But anyway, so he and I worked together to open up all of the old cases in San Francisco and solve them. And it was like a total Dirty Harry moment. You know, I was like looking at pictures from old Polaroids, and I mean, it was awesome. I was like, and then I was bringing closure to families, but I became like, judges would ask me for essentially what the law was because it was such a new area. So anyway.
Yeah, that had to be exciting and exhilarating. And yes, I know most people are here to talk about wine, but you'd be amazed at the number of questions related to statute of limitations on things. So I don't know.
No problem.
No.
There is not
Sean,
one on murder. Don't do it.
Yeah, Sean Manning, I know you've got some of those questions. I do want to get back to wine, though, because you had to, at some point in time, leave a very, very successful career and decide to pursue wine. What was the evolution of that decision?
Yeah, so my father got sick, and it was very unexpected, and I felt like I'd spent my entire life trying to come back into the family business, and my dad kept rejecting me. You know, it was like I didn't have enough work experience. He didn't want me to just, you know, default into the wine business because that's what my parents did. I mean, he had all of these reasons throughout the years, all of which I'm very thankful he had. I'm glad I had different exposure. I'm glad I earned my own street cred. And, you know, I guess really came back because I wanted to come back, not because I had to. I had a successful career, and I decided to make that decision when he got sick. First, it was because I had to take care of him. But, you know, I mean, I had a very great reputation, and an open arm, open door policy to coming back. And I basically made the decision that I wanted to carry out my family legacy, that my social obligation didn't have to be the most obvious. One of them could be sort of building an incredible lifestyle for my family, shepherding the land, and giving people moments of joy. You know, I mean, I was always helping people, but it was in a very sort of surreal sense of, you know, what is justice? And I wasn't necessarily making people happy. I was doing what, you know, the people thought was right. And in making wine, I get to share weddings with people, engagements with people, fun virtual happy hours. And we work incredibly hard to do this. And I think people have this perception that, you know, it's easy, oh, you've got the life. It's an incredibly hard job. This is way harder than being a homicide prosecutor. But I will say that, you know, I get phone calls that say, you know, my son proposed to his wife and you know, it's their 30th wedding anniversary and I want to get them a bottle of it, or whatever it is. You know, it's just, we get to participate now in the memories and the things that, especially given COVID, are so fun. You know, when I think about what I'm grateful for we can still enhance people's life at home despite COVID. They can order a bottle of wine and try to bring them normalcy, cook up a fabulous dinner, Zoom on with friends like we are today, and give them some peace and happiness.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is incredibly hard work. It's incredibly rewarding work. And one of the things I find interesting is you made it a mission to have a gender-specific environment at Hoops, and that has actually been disrupted to a degree because of COVID. And I think you told me that you had to switch winemakers because your winemaker was stranded at sea.
That is correct.
Which if I had a nickel for every time I heard that story.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone can relate. COVID has presented the obvious challenges, but then it's also really precipitated into some of the most bizarre scenarios I couldn't have even imagined. So, you know, wouldn't say that I specifically engineered our team to be all female, but we were uniquely an all female team. Okay. And I think part of that, I will say, had a little bit to do with when I was reviewing winemaking styles when my father was sick and deciding who should be on the team. I was constantly gravitating towards female winemakers because I felt like they weren't as stylistically, there was a lot more kind of balance and not so many, you know, like thorns sticking out. Like, I really want this to be the most powerful thing on the table. And that was just, you know, I hate to put it into these sort of didactic, stereotypical masculine versus feminine approaches to things, but I felt like there was just a real understated elegance to a lot of the wines that I got from female winemakers, which was really what I was trying to do. I didn't want this to be the only thing that you remembered from the evening. I wanted it to make everything better and just be in everybody's mind, you know, that it was like kind of like a support role. You know, I want it to be the star, but also the support role that keeps everything together. And
well, and it's interesting on the support role analogy. It's kind of funny because when we meet and speak with winemakers all over the country, but specifically in Napa and Sonoma, I've found over the years that and I hate to use the phrase the great ones, but the ones that I think are very, very successful, they have the opinion and the philosophy of, I don't want to be the star. I want the wine to speak. I want to try to get out of the way of what Mother Nature is doing and have more of a minimalist approach versus what you described as the thorny attributes where the individual is like, I want power, I want viscosity, I want, you know, all of the intensity. And that I think plays to a certain element, but for the most part, the winemakers that I think are the most down to earth, they like to take a supporting role, and they want to be behind the scenes versus they want the wine to speak for themselves.
Definitely. And I think that, you know, it just so happened that most of the wines, and whether this was psychological or otherwise, most of the wines that I gravitated to were female winemakers. And so that's how I navigated my team. And yeah, we've been entirely female run and operated down to vineyard management since I took over in 2012. That to say that I had 2 boys and I have a husband and a father. So actually my entire family is all male. And they serve a very important role because everybody in a farming family has a job, like we were talking about. So, you know, I can't say that, you know, men aren't a very important part of our of our business. But Anne, as you pointed out, Ann Botter was our winemaker, and she actually decided to circumnavigate the world on a boat because she loves sailing. And so she ended up going out to sea with the idea that she would return back for harvest. But she ended up docking in New Zealand, and COVID hit, and New Zealand wasn't letting her enter into New Zealand. And she couldn't leave her boat and her family behind by, coming back. And so they're stuck there. So we had to find a new.
So they were basically at a marina harbor in New Zealand, unable to enter the country?
Correct.
For how long?
Well, they're still there. I don't know if they're still unable to actually enter the country, but I do know that if they leave, they can't go back. So.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And so then you're on kind of the scramble in the summer to find a winemaker.
Well, 2 weeks ago, yeah.
Okay. And how does someone find a winemaker in 2 weeks prior to harvest?
I don't know. Maybe I should be a consultant. Hire me if you want.
Who'd you end up with, and how did you make the decision?
Well, I should say that, I know I've obviously grown up here. I know a lot of fantastic winemakers, and we ended up going with Aaron Pott because he has an incredible passion for organic farming, which is a very big part of our business. And that's one of his sort of foremost interests, is that farming side. He has a ton of experience with older vines and replanting estates because he's done a lot of that in France. And he likes innovative winemaking styles that, I say innovative, but we joke, we call it making ancient cool again. He likes using a lot of very traditional methods like amphora and that sort of thing. So those were a lot of I wanted to go back to what I consider like back to the earth, back to nature, sort of stripping away a lot of the fancy bells and whistles, because that's really what we are. I think that's what we do best. And I think that's the true story of Napa and almost wine. What's the best place to learn about the place is showcasing the place. And sometimes if you do all of this smoke and mirrors around it, the large marble monolith tasting rooms, you're not really going to understand the land. And people forget it's agriculture. And so what we wanted to do is really showcase that. So.
No, and talking about it's interesting. We were both talking about it a little second ago about people taking a supporting role. And as Aaron is about as prolific a winemaker right now as there is, and has been for 10 or 15 years. And he's one of those individuals I would describe as he likes site-specific vineyards. He likes the minimalistic old world style, and he's got the pedigree and background of experience and wisdom to bring that skill to Napa, and has been it for a number of years. So that's a pretty good choice. I don't know if he was at your high school party, if you know any of these winemakers.
No, he wasn't. But let's face it, he's really quirky and super nerdy, and so am I, right? So, he named his own wine Chateauneuf de Pot. He's hilarious. And
no, that is hysterical. He and Claire are great.
Yeah, so I love, just on an intellectual level, he's very intentional about what he does, which in my mind, it's fascinating. I learn as much from him, hopefully, as he does from me. But, we're very intentional about what we do, how we farm. And so together, I think it just makes, I think it just makes a good team. We have the same idea of what we want in your glass.
Exactly. I'm thrilled for the future, and hopefully your former winemaker makes it home safely. And there are worse places.
In New Zealand.
I was just going to say, there are worse places to be right now than New Zealand. I want to throw up another question, because I know people are texting me going, when's the next poll question launching? And so here is question number 2. And this one might have snuck out earlier. So there's a wonderful new tasting opportunity for Hoops fans. It's with me and my family at my home. It's our grand opus, one where you can sit on our patio and view the vineyards. It's a surprise, but I will share with the Angels. So this one probably, see that we're kind of limited. Zoom has better question asking than Facebook, because Facebook only allows 3 questions. Zoom, or 3 answers, I should say. Zoom, you can have multiple answers. You can have true, false. You can have multiple choice, and you can have 5 different answers if you want. I will give this 6 more seconds. 5, 4, 3. Oh, we had a tie until just a second ago. 1. So it actually is which one?
Well, I'm not sure if you meant it's our grand Oasis or not, because then it would be number 2. But I think it's number 3 because I'll share it with you, Angels. We have 2 exciting concepts, obviously. One is the Oasis where we're sitting, because it opened essentially right around COVID. Very few people have been able to visit us here. And then we actually do have our Oakville estate, which is our family estate. And although we're not allowed to host tastings there because of Napa Valley's restrictions, we've become extremely active members of the Save the Family Farms to help open access to our family homes. So I hope that with your support and with, my advocacy, our team's advocacy, we will be able to open up our tasting room, which for very special guests or secret, we can, maybe make an exception, wink, wink.
Yes, and I nicknamed this, if I have this thumbtack on the right one, because this is where I first got to meet Lindsay, and we entered right through here, underneath this beautiful into a courtyard, and then we sat inside this house, but then went out onto this tasting platform which sits above the vineyards, and we sat there and basically drank wine among the vines. And it's one of those areas where you pinch yourself and go, are we really doing this? It's you look around, you are in the center of the valley, you have mountains on both sides, you're with incredible company, amazing vistages, and you're sitting in the vines with a nice breeze. It doesn't stink. So as Lindsay said, there's a lot of restrictions on this. So if you know the secret knock and you happen to attend the high school party, which got her to a boarding school, or know someone that has, you may be invited, but the Angels have a way of potentially working with some things. But she did hit on something there that I think is very important, and it's the Save the Family Farms. And those of you that actually participated in when we had Elkhorn Peak with Elise, a very strong advocate of Save the Family Farms, she and Lindsay worked together with 2 other brilliant stars, trying to actually make certain that the playing field is level. Give the folks that are producing under 5,000 cases, 2,000 cases, 800 cases, an opportunity to actually get people to their doorstep, or get people into the fold, if you will, bring more people into the tent versus the restrictions. As a matter of fact, Lindsay, I'll let you talk a little bit about the mission, because we think it's one of the most important philanthropic partnerships we have.
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest challenges is that most consumers don't realize Napa is unique in terms of its regulations. So it's much more restrictive with respect to tours and tastings than anywhere else in California. Everywhere else in California, I am a licensed winery. I mean, I am in Napa too. I'm a licensed winery. But according to Napa specific regulations, I actually have to build a $5 to $10 million winery on my property, which may mean pulling out vineyards that I convert into a production facility before I can host you to my property. So I have to build an actual winery production facility, and I have to meet the county restrictions, which is like 20,000 gallons of wine, which is 10,000 or more cases. And the reality is that most small farming families who are literally living off of their land don't have the capital, $5 to $10 million, to build a production facility. We all use cooperative kitchens, essentially cooperative farming or cooperative production facilities that we call crush facilities, to share the capital expense of the equipment, and so that we can pass on quality wine to you at non-exorbitant prices, but also so that we can make limited quantities. It doesn't make sense for a small producer to buy a ton of equipment if we only need to use a bottling line once a year.
Right.
And we're not a large corporate entity. And so what Napa has done is basically all of those experiences that people want. tasting in the vineyard, going to the smaller producers, boutique producers, coming to my family home and tasting with my husband and my children. All of that is actually legally not allowed in Napa, but it's allowed everywhere else in California. And so what we're trying to do is basically, as you mentioned, level the playing field where the fabric of Napa, the small family farm, is able to host people in their home environment, whatever that may be. It's not a $5 million facility, but it's our authentic vineyard. So, and I think consumers want that experience in reality. People want to, come and have an authentic experience, meet the family, walk through the vineyard, learn about the production process, and you're not going to get that at a corporate tasting room. You're just not. And so a lot of people are leaving Napa and going to Sonoma or Paso Robles or places that still allow that because that's the experience they're looking for. And they don't realize we have it in Napa everywhere, but the county is not letting you come visit us. So it's a big problem for us. And it's basically making small production not an economic viability. A lot of these farmers are selling their properties off to corporate entities or to people who want luxury homes because we can't make a living. If you can't come visit us, how do we get you our wine? I guess now via Zoom, but that wasn't really a thing.
Well, other than Cellar Angels, good point. And Jeff Greasy asked, maybe do you know a good attorney that can help with this? My guess is you've got a lot of attorneys helping with this with regards to this process. And it is a regulatory nightmare. And by the way, that's just the regulatory nightmare in Napa. We all are familiar with the regulatory nightmare of the 3-tier system, the direct-to-consumer market, the state registrations, all the licensing, right on down the line. And it's really unfortunate because, could you imagine tasting at this area behind me and sitting there and then recognizing, oh, well, I live in Michigan. Well, maybe I do have a direct-to-consumer license in Michigan. Maybe I don't. And I would like to get your wines, but I can't. It is an incredibly restrictive environment, unfortunately, given that it's 2020. I do want to touch about a couple of different things before we go to commercial break and the networks kick us off. But tell me a little bit about the portfolio. We've talked about the 2015 cab, whites, reds, the theory behind case production. What are you after? What is Lindsay's grand plan?
Well, I would say Lindsay's grand plan is to develop a line of wine for the Oasis property that you see behind you, because it's a new vineyard site for us. 2017 was our first harvest, but because of the smoke, we did not produce. So it's a new facility with new grapes, and that's sort of one of my first goals. We have a direct-to-consumer line of small batch production that basically reflects a couple vineyards that were influential in our winemakers' histories. So we do buy some grapes to make little batches of Sauvignon Blanc, for example, that we don't grow. And that's a fun project because we can be a little bit more flexible and play with some things that we don't grow. We're very heavily Cabernet because of where we're located. And so, we have to be true to where we're located. I can't put Pinot Noir here and expect it to grow very well. So, I grow Cabernet because I'm in literally the bullseye of Napa. It's the hottest area, and we're in Oakville. That's what you grow there because that's what does best. So I would say to just continue to enhance and improve our wine by, touch points, and also expand into these culinary virtual programs, which I think have really helped us, has helped level the playing field in a lot of ways. Now because people aren't being wined and dined by individuals, nobody can travel, I think, people are able to zoom in to the small family producer that have interesting stories to tell. So I really appreciate you taking the time on your Friday evening to spend it with me and learn a lot about what's going on in Napa.
Well, and the second question, in addition to the portfolio, and I have one follow-up question on the portfolio, what is case production now, and where do you see it going, staying, or retreating?
Our case production really varies vintage to vintage,
right.
To be honest with you. And the last 3 years are not a great, not a great example of what's going on. 2017, we were at 50%, 2018 was like 40% over. So, where do I my case production is going to land. I think I probably would feel comfortable going up to 10,000 cases with what we own. And that's probably where I would stop, because it's very important to me, again, to maintain that authentic story. So it has to be our vineyard site that we produce from, or something that we acquire, or something that's important to us for some reason. So a long-term partnership, something like that.
And then the hoops label and the canine imagery. And
Yes.
It almost, I mean, I see a canine, I see a tattoo, getting back to tattoos. And it's on the label. There it is. So I mean, who doesn't love a good dog story? So I'm fascinated by this story. So please share.
So Dante was my father's favorite child. So he got the label, I got the job. Dante was our family dog, Jack Russell Terrier. He lived until he was 19 years old. And we now have 2 rescue dogs. They have their own wines. So we have a Maya's Merlot and a Sophie Syrah, because we couldn't leave them out. But Dante was really the heart and soul of the winery. I will say that we had another dog, but it just goes to show a little bit of, I don't want to call it gender bias, but the boy got the label.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
That is not good. Is there anything I've missed, or any question that the panel has that they would like to ask that is not, I did not cover? Or Lindsay, is there anything that you want to add that is important to you?
No, I mean, continue to support Napa wines. Obviously, the fact that there are wildfires doesn't mean that every wine is affected, doesn't mean, and especially with small family farms, I mean, your support means the world. I mean, in a lot of ways, it actually is helping maintain Napa and the original Napa story, because, with your support, having us send you wine from here, it allows us to stay alive, stay economically viable, despite the fact that all the restaurants are closed and we can't see everybody. So I can't tell you how important it is. But when you do come, please come visit some of the smaller producers. You won't necessarily easily find us on Highway 29, but we will definitely give you a great time.
Yeah, I would echo that, because, and everyone knows Cellar Angels, we founded the company 10 years ago to actually promote and help elevate the small winery. And people that we've set up on tastings, both with you and others, the small winery is really what it's all about. And you get that intimate family exposure, you get the high touch, and you get an experience that's unrivaled. So I do want to thank you, because you chose a very busy Friday afternoon in wine country, in harvest, to spend some time with us. So thank you so much for that. Everybody else that wants to support the small family winery, you can, probably the easiest way is to go to Cellar Angels, buy or join Wine Club. And by the way, for Wine Club members, you got a special QR code this past quarter. So hopefully that was met with enthusiasm, because I think that is going to stick around. It allows us to do a whole bunch of neat things and tell a deeper side of the story of the wineries that we feature. But I think we want to tip a glass on this day of remembrance to everything that we have to be thankful for. And as I say, we don't have, just because we have to physically distance doesn't mean we have to socially distance. And Lindsay Hoops has been gracious enough to spend an hour with us in a very, very busy time called harvest. And so for that, we are thankful. We are thrilled that you are safe. And all of us, when we do get out to Napa, we need to go spend some time on that patio and at a lovely tasting area called the Oasis. Lindsay, thank you so much. Best of luck to you soon. We will see each other and have a glass together and bend an elbow. Be safe. Cheers.